My name is Allison Bennett, 34 years old, standing in the glittering dining room of our family's Queen Anne estate in Seattle. The annual reunion was in full swing, laughter and the clinking of glasses filling the air. Then my mother rose, wine glass in hand, her smile razor sharp. "I'm proud of all my children," she announced, her gaze fixed on me except the one who's never made me proud. The room fell silent. Her words sliced through me, branding me the failure in front of everyone. I didn't flinch. I'd endured her contempt before, but this time it was public, intentional. My fingers tightened around the envelope in my pocket, the one holding proof of a secret she'd buried for years. I walked over, placed it on the table, and said evenly, "Happy Mother's Day." My tone was calm, but every syllable dripped with venom. Then I turned, walked out, and triggered the plan to reclaim the $1 million house I had once gifted her. Minutes later, her scream echoed through the estate. What was in that envelope? Something that shattered her perfect facade. The truth had been simmering for months, a betrayal I never saw coming. That evening, I wasn't just taking back property. I was reclaiming my worth. But how did it come to this? What drove me to that moment? What family secret has left you speechless? Share your story in the comments. And let's talk about those moments that change everything. Don't forget to like and subscribe to discover what was inside that envelope. Growing up in Seattle, I learned early that my mother's approval was a prize rarely won. Our family, the Bennetts, lived in a grand Queen Anne estate where my mother, Patricia Bennett, reigned as the head of a thriving fashion retail empire. Her boutiques dotted the Pacific Northwest, each one a testament to her ambition and control. My father, Gregory Bennett, a retired lawyer, preferred the quiet of his study, leaving her to shape our family's dynamics. My younger sister, Victoria Bennett, 3 years my junior, was the shining star in her eyes, a designer destined to carry on her legacy. Patricia's world revolved around fashion, and Victoria was her chosen heir. I was 16, sitting at our dining table watching my mother pore over my sister's sketches for a school art show. "This is brilliance," she'd say, her voice warm with pride. My own project's apps I coded in my room earned a quick glance and a detached, "That's nice." She'd turn back to Victoria, praising her vision and potential. My passion for technology wasn't merely overlooked. It was seen as a disappointment, a deviation from the family path. In my early 20s, the favoritism became even clearer. At a cousin's wedding, Patricia introduced Victoria to guests as my rising designer, her arm wrapped proudly around her shoulder. I stood nearby, clutching a drink, my recent internship at a tech startup left unmentioned. "She'll take over the business," my mother told a family friend, her eyes never meeting mine. My father, as always, stayed out of it, engrossed in a discussion about law. Victoria caught my gaze and offered a small, apologetic smile, but it couldn't erase the sting of being invisible. One Thanksgiving remains etched in my memory. I was 24, home from college, eager to share news of a coding competition I'd won. I brought my laptop to the living room, ready to show my parents the app I'd built. Patricia barely looked up from Victoria's portfolio of dress designs. "This is what matters," she said, passing the sketches to my aunt. "Real creativity." I closed my laptop chest tight and excused myself. Later, Victoria found me and whispered, "I hate how she does this to you." But her sympathy couldn't undo the years of dismissal. Public events were no different. At a charity gala for Patricia's brand, she paraded Victoria on stage, calling her the future of fashion. I was introduced as my other daughter who works with computers, her tone implying it was lesser. Guests nodded politely, but I felt the weight of her words, each one a reminder that I'd never measure up. I kept attending these events, hoping something might change, but I always left feeling smaller. My attempts to connect didn't stop. I'd call my mother, visit the estate, even assist with Victoria's website launch. But every conversation circled back to my sister's latest collection or Patricia's next business plan. My father's silence offered no comfort. He'd nod retreat to his books and leave me to face her judgment alone. Victoria never gloated. She shared her successes openly and often asked for my input. Yet the shadow of Patricia's favoritism loomed between us, an unspoken divide that never faded. By my late 20s, I had built a solid place in Seattle's tech scene, leading projects that made headlines. Still, at every family gathering, Patricia found ways to minimize it. Victoria's opening a new store, she'd announce, ignoring my recent promotion. I'd nod, swallow the hurt, and keep trying to earn her approval. The weight of her preference for my sister grew heavier with time, a quiet ache that followed me through every achievement. Sitting in my apartment staring at the city's lights, I resolved to make one final attempt to change her mind. Leaving home for college, I set out to prove myself in a world my mother didn't respect. Seattle's tech scene was booming, and I dove in determined to make my mark. At 18, I enrolled at the University of Washington to study computer science. My first internship at a small startup opened my eyes to coding's limitless potential. Building apps felt like creating something from nothing. When I called home to share my excitement, my mother's tone was cold. "That's not a real career," she said, comparing my work to my sister's fashion designs. "Victoria's building something tangible." By junior year, I landed a position at a growing tech firm debugging software and pitching new features. I'd stay up late, fueled by coffee and ambition, crafting solutions that earned recognition from my team. At 21, I presented my first app prototype at a campus showcase and won a regional tech award. I sent my mother a photo of the trophy, hoping for a flicker of pride. Her reply was a curt text: "Nice, but focus on something stable." She never mentioned it again, though she framed Victoria's design sketches on her office wall. After graduation, I joined a startup in Seattle's Pioneer Square, a scrappy team developing software for local businesses. I climbed from junior developer to project lead within 3 years, managing a team of 10 by 25. Our app streamlined supply chains, saving clients millions, and earned me a feature in a tech magazine. I mailed a copy to my parents' Queen Anne home, thinking it might change her view. At a family dinner, she glanced at the article, then said, "Victoria's collection just got a full spread in Vogue." My father, as usual, stayed silent, flipping through his newspaper. The comparisons never stopped. At 27, I led a project that secured a major contract with a national retailer. My team celebrated with drinks, toasting our success. I called my mother, hoping she'd share the moment. "That's great, Allison," she said, her tone flat. "But Victoria's launching her own label next month." "That's the kind of ambition I admire." I hung up, staring at my computer screen, the glow of achievement dimmed by her words. At 30, I became a senior engineer at a leading tech firm, overseeing a platform that powered millions of transactions daily. My name appeared on industry panels, and I spoke at conferences across the West Coast. One evening, after a keynote in San Francisco, I overheard attendees praising my talk. I felt on top of the world until I checked my phone. My mother had texted, "Saw Victoria's runway show online. She's unstoppable." No mention of my speech, even though I'd sent her the link. I tried to bridge the gap. I visited home, attended Victoria's fashion events, even helped with her brand's website. My sister appreciated it. She'd hug me and say, "You're killing it, Allie." But my mother's approval remained out of reach. At a boutique opening, she introduced me as Allison, who works in tech, her tone implying it was less impressive than Victoria's glamorous career. I'd smile, hiding the ache, but each slight chipped away at me. By 32, I'd built a solid reputation as a tech innovator, mentoring young coders and launching open-source projects. My work earned me an industry award, a glass plaque I displayed proudly in my apartment. I invited my parents to the ceremony, hoping they'd finally see me. My father sent a polite note citing a scheduling conflict. My mother didn't respond. She was at Victoria's Fashion Week debut. I stood on that stage, gripping the plaque, realizing her validation might never come. Still, I pressed on, driven by the need to prove I wasn't the failure she believed I was. My latest project, a platform for small businesses, was gaining traction, and I was negotiating a promotion. But her voice lingered, calling my work unstable, echoing in the back of my mind. I wanted one last chance to change her perception, to show her I was enough. Walking into a real estate office, I saw an opportunity to do just that. Months before the reunion, I walked through a house I'd just bought, keys in hand. The Queen Anne Estate, a sprawling property with sweeping views of Seattle's skyline, cost over $1 million, a gift I hoped would finally earn my mother's approval. I'd spent years chasing her recognition, and this was my grand gesture, timed perfectly for Mother's Day. The house, with its high ceilings and polished floors, embodied everything she valued: status, elegance, and legacy. I imagined her face lighting up, maybe even a rare, "I'm proud of you." But as I signed the papers, a knot of doubt tightened in my chest. To make sure everything was perfect, I called my best friend Kimberly Watson, a real estate lawyer with a sharp eye for detail. We met at her downtown office, a sleek space lined with law books and coffee mugs. I handed her the contract, expecting a quick review. She flipped through the pages, her brow furrowing. "Allison, this looks solid," she said, "but I found something else in the property records." She pulled out a faded document, its edges yellowed, and slid it across the desk. It was my grandmother's will, a name I hadn't heard in years. Kimberly's voice was steady but serious. "This will divide your grandmother's estate equally between you and your sister. But the records show your mother claimed it all." I stared at the paper, my heart racing. The document listed assets, land, investments, a trust fund meant for both Victoria and me. Yet my mother had taken everything, citing a revised will I'd never seen. Kimberly leaned forward. I cross-checked the signatures. "The one on the revision doesn't match your grandmother's. It's forged." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I'd grown up believing my mother inherited everything fairly, that my grandmother's wealth had fueled her fashion empire. Now the truth unraveled: she had cheated us, her own daughters. I thought of Victoria, unaware of her stolen share, and the years I'd spent chasing approval from someone capable of this. "Why would she do this?" I whispered. Kimberly shook her head. "Greed, control, maybe both. You need to confront her, but carefully." I spent days poring over the document in my apartment, cross-referencing dates and signatures. My grandmother had passed when I was a teenager, her memory a warm contrast to my mother's cold ambition. She'd always encouraged my coding, slipping me tech magazines when Patricia wasn't looking. The betrayal cut deeper because of her. I called Kimberly again and met her at a cafe near Pike Place Market. Over coffee, she laid out my options: challenge the will in court, risking a public scandal, or gather more evidence quietly. "You have leverage," she said, "but you need to decide how to use it." I didn't want to fight, not yet. I decided to move forward with the house gift, hoping it might soften Patricia, maybe even prompt an explanation. I arranged for the deed transfer, picturing the Mother's Day reveal at the family reunion. But the will's shadow lingered. I began noticing inconsistencies in my mother's stories, vague answers about my grandmother's estate, abrupt subject changes whenever I asked about the past. During lunch with Victoria, I hinted at our inheritance. Her confusion confirmed she knew nothing. Her trust in our mother was absolute. My doubt hardened into suspicion. I dug deeper, requesting old financial records through Kimberly's contacts. Each document painted a clearer picture: Patricia had redirected funds meant for us, funneling them into her boutiques. The house, my grand gesture, now felt like bitter irony, a gift to someone who had stolen from me. I wanted her to see me. I told Kimberly, my voice shaking, "But she's been lying my whole life." She squeezed my hand. "You're not just giving her a house, you're giving yourself a choice." I finalized the paperwork, but my plan shifted. The gift would proceed, but I'd hold on to the truth about the will until the right moment. The reunion was coming, and I needed to be ready. Stepping into the estate for the gathering, I felt the full weight of what I knew. The Bennett estate glowed with lights as I arrived for the reunion. Guests mingled throughout the grand Queen Anne home, laughter and clinking glasses filling the air. My mother Patricia stood at the center, radiant in a tailored dress, guiding relatives and friends through the new house I'd gifted her. She pointed out the chandelier and marble countertops, calling it a dream come true. Not once did she mention my name. I stood by the staircase, clutching a glass of wine, the weight of her silence settling like a stone in my chest. I'd hoped the house would change things, that she'd acknowledge my effort. Instead, she floated through the crowd, her voice bright, as she boasted about the home's elegance. "It's perfect for our family legacy," she told a cousin, her arm wrapped around Victoria. My sister, dressed in one of her own designs, smiled politely but caught my eye, her expression apologetic. She slipped away from the group and joined me, whispering, "She should have thanked you." I shrugged, forcing a smile, though the familiar ache of being overlooked gnawed at me. Patricia's admiration for Victoria was relentless. At the buffet table, she pulled my sister forward, showing off her latest collection to a group of investors. "She's revolutionizing fashion," she said, her eyes gleaming with pride. I hovered nearby, hoping for even a nod or glance, anything. Instead, she turned briefly toward me and said, "Allison, grab some more napkins." The dismissal stung, reducing me to a bystander in my own gesture. Victoria squeezed my arm and murmured, "I told her you bought the house." But Patricia had already moved on, laughing with another guest. I wandered onto the patio, needing air. My Aunt Deborah Hayes and her daughter Angela spotted me and waved me over. Deborah, my mother's younger sister, had always been kind, her warmth a contrast to Patricia's sharpness. "You've done well for yourself," she said, sipping her drink. "I read about your tech award last month." Angela, my cousin, chimed in, asking about my latest project. Their interest felt genuine, but it couldn't fill the void left by my mother's indifference. I thanked them softly and glanced back at the party where Patricia was still holding court. As dinner approached, the tension thickened. I took my seat at the long table across from my father Gregory, who nodded but said little, his focus fixed on his plate. Patricia rose to address the guests, her voice carrying over the clink of silverware. "This house is a testament to our family's success," she declared, gesturing toward Victoria. "My daughter's vision will carry us forward." I waited, my heart pounding, for any mention of my part. None came. Instead, she added, "Some choose paths that don't quite fit our legacy." Her eyes flicked to me, brief but pointed, and the room fell silent. I gripped my fork, my face burning. Victoria leaned close, whispering, "She's wrong, Allie. You're incredible." Her words were kind, but they couldn't erase the public slight. Deborah reached for my hand under the table, her touch steady, but I felt myself shrinking, the room closing in. Angela shot me a sympathetic look, yet I could barely meet her eyes. The guests resumed their chatter, oblivious to my humiliation, while Patricia turned the spotlight back to Victoria's upcoming fashion show. I excused myself, stepping into the kitchen to steady my breathing. Victoria followed, her face drawn with concern. "I tried to tell her to stop," she said quietly. "She doesn't see how much this hurts you." I nodded, unable to speak the truth about the forged will flashing in my mind. I hadn't told Victoria yet, but her loyalty made me wonder how much she'd been kept in the dark. "It's fine," I lied, my voice hollow. "I'm used to it." Back at the table, I watched my mother charm the crowd, her laughter sharp and confident. Every smile, every word felt like a wall between us. Deborah and Angela tried to draw me back into conversation, asking about my work and life in Seattle. I answered, but my thoughts wandered, circling the secret I carried. The house, meant to be a bridge, had become a symbol of everything broken between us. I felt more alone than ever, surrounded by family yet unseen. As dessert was served, I knew I couldn't stay silent much longer. As dessert was served, Patricia rose her wine glass, catching the light. The Queen Anne dining room fell silent, guests turning toward my mother as she prepared to speak. Her presence commanded the room, poised, precise, perfectly in control. I sat at the far end of the table, my heart heavy with the secret I carried, the forged will Kimberly had uncovered. I'd come to this reunion hoping for change, but the evening only deepened my resolve. The envelope in my pocket felt like a ticking bomb. "Thank you all for joining us," my mother began, her voice smooth and confident. "This house, this moment represents everything our family stands for: elegance, ambition, success." She gestured toward my sister standing nearby in one of her own designs. "Victoria is the heart of that legacy. Her talent and drive will carry our name forward." The guests applauded warmly. Victoria blushed, glancing at me with unease, but Patricia's gaze stayed fixed on her golden child. Then her eyes found me, sharp, deliberate. "And then there's Allison," she said, her tone cooling, "the one who's never quite made me proud." A murmur rippled through the room, forks pausing midair. My father Gregory stared down at his plate, his silence as familiar as ever. My Aunt Deborah gripped her napkin, her face tight with disapproval. Angela, my cousin, looked at me wide-eyed. I felt the weight of every gaze, but it was my mother's words that cut the deepest. The room seemed to spin as years of dismissal crashed over me, every ignored achievement, every slight at family gatherings. The envelope burned in my pocket, its contents a truth she couldn't erase. I rose my chair, scraping against the floor, and the chatter stopped. "Mom," I said, my voice steady despite the fire in my chest, "I have something for you." I drew the envelope from my pocket, its edges worn from days of holding it, and placed it on the table in front of her. "Happy Mother's Day." Her smile faltered, her fingers hesitating as she reached for it. The guests watched in confusion. Victoria stepped closer, her brow furrowed. "Allie, what is this?" she whispered. I didn't answer. My eyes stayed on my mother. She opened the envelope, pulling out the documents, copies of my grandmother's original will and the forged version Kimberly had discovered. Her face blanched, her hand trembling as she read. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice low, almost a hiss. "I know what you did," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You stole from us, from me and Victoria. That will was supposed to split everything equally, but you forged it to take it all." Gasps filled the silence. Deborah leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Angela covered her mouth. My father finally looked up, his expression unreadable. Victoria stared at the papers, disbelief and hurt etched across her face. "Is this true?" she whispered. Patricia's composure cracked, her lips parting as if to respond, but no words came. I didn't wait. "Keep the house," I said coldly. "For now." I turned and walked out of the dining room, the weight of their stares following me. The front door loomed ahead, and I stepped into the cool Seattle night, my breath visible in the air. The hurt and betrayal churned inside me, but so did a strange clarity. I was done chasing her approval. In my car, I called Kimberly. "It's time," I said firmly. "Start the process to reclaim the house." She didn't hesitate. "Everything's ready," she replied. "The original will give you and Victoria legal standing. We can file the claim, the evidence is airtight." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. City lights blurred past as I drove away from the estate. The house, once a symbol of family pride, had become leverage, a means to expose her deceit. Later, parked near a quiet park, I let the silence settle. The documents were my weapon, but using them meant reopening old wounds. Victoria's face flashed in my mind, her confusion, her pain. She deserved to know the truth, though I never wanted her to learn it this way. My mother's empire built on lies was beginning to crumble, and I was the one holding the match. Driving back to my apartment, I felt the first spark of something new, not anger this time, but resolve. I would see this through. Driving away from the estate, my phone buzzed with notifications. The Seattle night was still, the city lights blurring past as I navigated the familiar streets of Queen Anne. I ignored the calls, gripping the steering wheel, the echo of my mother's stunned silence still ringing in my ears. The envelope I'd left on the dining table, proof of her forged will, had shattered the facade she'd spent decades constructing. I didn't know what would come next, but the truth was out, and there was no going back. Back at the Bennett estate, Patricia sat alone in her study, the documents spread across her desk. The original will bearing my grandmother's careful signature stared back at her, undeniable. Her hands trembled as she traced the pages, her empire of control crumbling beneath the weight of her deceit. She had built her fashion boutiques on stolen inheritance, claiming it as her birthright, but now the evidence lay bare. She called her lawyer, her voice edged with panic. "This can't stand," she insisted, pacing the room. "I'll fight it." But her lawyer's tone was calm, warning her that the forgery was evident and her legal footing uncertain. My phone lit up again as I reached my apartment. It was Victoria, her name flashing on the screen. I hesitated, the memory of her hurt expression at dinner still fresh. "Allie," she said. When I answered, her voice unsteady, she admitted it. "Mom told me the will was fake." I leaned against the counter, the weight of her words settling in. "My sister, always caught between us," sounded broken. "She said she did it to protect the business, to secure our future." She continued, "But I don't believe her. You deserved better." Her empathy was real, but it couldn't undo the years of distance. I asked what happened after I left. Victoria described the chaos, guests whispering, Deborah demanding answers, Angela trying to calm the room. My father, as usual, kept his distance, retreating to his study with a glass of bourbon. Patricia, cornered, lashed out, blaming me for destroying the reunion. "She's threatening to sue you," Victoria warned, her tone heavy with worry. "She says you can't take the house." I closed my eyes, the sting of her defiance mixing with the same resolve I'd felt walking out. "Let her try," I said quietly. The next morning, I met Kimberly at her downtown office. The space was familiar, lined with legal texts, but the air felt heavier now. I recounted the dinner, the confrontation, Patricia's reaction. Kimberly listened, calm but focused. "The original will is airtight," she said, pulling up documents on her laptop. "Your grandmother's intent was clear. You and Victoria were to split the estate equally. The forged document won't hold in court." She outlined the process: we'd file a claim to nullify the forgery and reclaim the assets, including the Queen Anne house I'd gifted. "It's legally yours," she confirmed. "Patricia has no standing." Her words were a lifeline, but they carried a cost. Challenging the will meant dismantling my mother's legacy, exposing her lies to everyone. I thought of Victoria, caught in the middle, and the rift that would only deepen. Still, the house, once a gesture of reconciliation, had become a symbol of betrayal. Taking it back wasn't revenge. It was justice, a way to honor my grandmother's wishes. I gave Kimberly the go-ahead, signing the first documents with a steady hand, though my heart pounded with the weight of it all. Later, Victoria called again from her studio. "Mom's furious," she said, her voice low. "She's talking about countersuing, saying you're trying to destroy her." I heard the strain in her words, her loyalty torn between us. "I'm with you, Allie," she added softly. "I didn't know about the will, but I want what's fair." Her support brought a flicker of comfort, though it couldn't erase the image of our mother's empire unraveling. Gregory, true to form, sent a short text, "Let's keep this civil." His detachment felt like another betrayal, a refusal to face the truth. Patricia's threats didn't stop. She left voicemails, her tone glacial, accusing me of ingratitude and tearing the family apart. "You'll regret this," she warned in one message, her voice sharp enough to cut. I didn't reply, forwarding each recording to Kimberly for the legal file. The house, once her prized possession, was slipping from her grasp. Court filings began, and Kimberly's team moved quickly, securing the original will as evidence. Patricia's empire, built on my grandmother's stolen fortune, was collapsing, her boutiques now stained by the truth. As I stood in my apartment gazing at the Seattle skyline, the enormity of what I'd set in motion settled over me. The fallout had begun, and this time I wasn't running. Months later, I stood in my new office, Seattle's skyline stretching before me, a constant reminder of how far I had come. My tech startup was now an emerging name in the city, a testament to persistence and rebirth. The legal battle over my grandmother's will had finally ended, leaving behind a trail of revelations that reshaped my life. I had severed all ties with my mother, Patricia, whose empire collapsed under the weight of her exposed deceit. The Queen Anne house, once a gift I'd given her, was back in my name, now a symbol of justice rather than reconciliation. I chose to sell it, using the proceeds to fund my company and close that painful chapter for good. The truth about the forged will spread quickly. Seattle's fashion circles buzzed with gossip, and my mother's boutiques faced boycotts as former clients distanced themselves from the scandal. Her name, once synonymous with sophistication, became a cautionary tale. She sent letters begging for forgiveness, but I never replied. Years of dismissal and betrayal had built a wall too high to tear down. I had spent so long chasing her approval, but now I was free to define my worth on my own terms. Victoria, my sister, became my anchor. She had stood by me through the court battles, her loyalty unshaken despite the heartbreak of discovering our mother's lies. We met often at a cafe near Pike Place Market, rebuilding our bond over coffee and hard-earned honesty. "I wish I'd seen it sooner," she once said, her voice heavy with regret. "You didn't deserve how she treated you." I squeezed her hand, grateful beyond words. Together, we divided our grandmother's reclaimed assets, her share fueling her design studio, mine powering my tech ventures. What was once a relationship strained by Patricia's favoritism grew into something stronger, built on mutual respect and shared healing. One evening, while sorting through old boxes in my apartment, I discovered a letter hidden inside a forgotten book. The handwriting was unmistakably my mother's, dated years before I was born, and addressed to a man named Ronald Foster. My heart pounded as I read her words. Confessions of love and regret for a secret kept too long. Ronald, I realized, was my biological father, a truth Patricia had buried. I found him through public records, my hands trembling as I dialed his number. He lived in Tacoma, a retired engineer leading a quiet life. "I never knew," he said when we met at a park, his eyes searching mine. "She told me you weren't mine." Our first meeting was cautious, filled with long pauses and tentative smiles. Ronald spoke of his youth, his brief romance with Patricia, and the years he had spent wondering about the child he'd never known. I told him about my work, my ambitions, and the family history that had shaped me. Slowly, we began building something new, a connection not defined by the past, but by the possibility of understanding. We met monthly, sometimes at his modest home, sometimes at a diner overlooking the bay, each conversation a small step toward healing wounds neither of us had realized ran so deep. My career became both refuge and purpose. Leading my startup, I threw myself into projects that pushed boundaries and inspired innovation, earning recognition I no longer sought from anyone else. I mentored young coders, sharing the lessons I'd learned the hard way, and built a community that valued authenticity over pedigree. The ache of my mother's rejection gradually faded, replaced by a quiet pride in what I had built. I was no longer surviving her shadow, I was thriving beyond it. Looking back, I see the cost of chasing approval that was never mine to win. Patricia's deceit and her lies about the will forced me to face an undeniable truth. Family isn't defined by blood, but by those who truly see and respect you. Victoria, Ronald, and even my team, they became my chosen family, their support, a mirror reflecting my worth. My mother's betrayal taught me to stop seeking validation from those who withhold it, and to find strength in my own accomplishments. I don't regret the house, the confrontation, or the fight for justice. Each was a step toward freedom, a way to honor my grandmother's legacy and my own resilience. To anyone listening, remember this: your value is never determined by someone else's approval. Family is found in the people who lift you up and see you for who you are. And when the past tries to pull you back, affirming your own worth becomes the greatest victory of all.